Okay, so today we're going to look at each of the parameters in Pulsar so you can get started making some weird sounds as soon as possible. Now, the first thing you need to know is you just press this and it starts making noise, right? It's kind of how I perceive this to be used. It's pretty easy to draw this into a session as a MIDI sustain note on. Otherwise, you can just draw in any MIDI note and it will trigger it. Now, it doesn't control the formant frequency, the fundamental frequency, any other parameter other than whether or not the train is running. Potential, I've seen other Pulsar generators that then will pitch it, but the thing is, I don't know, it locks you into the equal tempered scale anyway. I'm kind of getting towards that with the key thing, but we'll see. As for now, that turns it on. So does that, all right? Now, once it's running, you might want to tweak the parameters a little bit. So let's try the fundamental first of all. This is the rate of emission of pulsarettes. Those are the clicks, right? Right now we have 19 clicks per second. Let's take it down to 2. Okay. Let's go up. Oh, now it's starting to sound a little bit more like a continuous stream of notes, doesn't it? All right, let me turn that down here. I had some randomization going on. So especially because there's no randomization going on, because the formants aren't very much, they don't have very much width, we can really hear this fundamental. All right. All right, now let's go through the formant and see what happens here. Hit the pedal, and as I start to adjust it, I think you get the idea. So we're still hearing that rhythmic value of the fundamental frequency, 10 hertz, right? But now I can control one of the formants. There's 2. But it lets you do cool stuff like this. So watch, if I love doing this. I put one formant really low and one really high. And it sounds better. It sounds thumpier than if they were both at like 100 hertz. That kind of works, but let me put this at like that high. What I want you to do is pay close attention to the transition between pitch and rhythm in the fundamental. So as I get lower and lower, see if you can decide where it becomes a rhythm and not a pitch. I thought the range of human hearing was 20 hertz. This is 13. I can hear it fine. It doesn't work that way. So one of the main concepts, and with the way Stochastic used it in Contacta, is to transverse that continuous wave shape to the granular particle, that instantaneous moment. We're going through the waves of time to that scientific instantaneous moment that would be a grain or a sound event. So this is why I think it has to do with free will, right? The nature around us being the wave that pushes us in the directions, the frequency of the fundamental, right? The emission. But then the formant is the characteristics of the individual. And depending on the width, it might become more dominant, it might become more self-controlled or less self-controlled with the small amount of width. As they start to blur together, when the fundamental gets faster and faster and it approaches the speed of the formant, the formant and the fundamental kind of become the same. What if that is the speed of light? Holy shit. Okay, so like what I'm saying is what if we only achieve free will if we're going at the speed of light? Wouldn't that be crazy? Because then like cause can't produce any effects because the effects are like happening before the cause. I don't think that makes any sense, but who knows, right? But it goes from that continuous wave shape, right, to that particle. And this is the defining line between it. Now it's kind of set up to do it, so it's not really a Copernican inversion. I don't even know what that was, but it's pretty cool though, right? So I invite you to explore that. Like, what is frequency? What is pitch? What is rhythm? They're kind of the same thing. All right, continuing on now, here's something that I have added. So we have like serum, we have massive, we have these wavetable oscillators and synthesizers that allow us to interpolate between vectors of wavetables, right? And it gives you that cool kind of changing spectra. That's what it is, right? Different wave shapes. I haven't seen that necessarily within a Pulsar generator. I'm sure someone's done something kind of like it, but this is pretty easy to use, right? So watch this, and this is very visible. Let's go a little bit faster. Watch that wave shape. Ready? Sync function. Right now it's just 4 wave shapes. I want to keep it pretty limited, but future versions will let you upload wave shapes in Wavetable Vectors. So not only are we controlling the spectra of the whole pulsar train by the formant and the fundamental and the other formant, right? And the width of that. If we get going faster, we'll get into the trigger pattern stuff later, and the burst masking. But we are also controlling the spectrum of the pulsarette. So the pulsarette makes the spectrum of the fundamental, which is the spectrum of the whole train, but the spectrum of the pulsarette, which then influences the fundamental, also is controllable by a wave shape. So by interpolating through it, it gives you just another parameter of control for pulsar synthesis, as if any form of particle synthesis needed more parameters. But we got them. All right. This is a new trajectory for pulsar synthesis. Int is for intermittence. This is a random hit and miss factor. Right now, it's 100% guaranteed to hit. Now it's like 90% guaranteed. Hear it sputtering? Now it's like 50. So that's very noisy. It's random, right? What if we wanted something a little bit more ordered? Okay, let's take this to 5. No, let's do it 3/2. Check it out when it goes up at a higher frequency. Kind of makes its own interval by itself. What I'll do is do 1 to 10, and then it's essentially just dividing the fundamental frequency by 10, right? So then I can have more control between 0 and 20 hertz. So it's like kind of a zoom. That's an easy way to use it. Or maybe you just, I shouldn't say fun, it's a utilitarian way to use the masking effect, the trigger patterns. Because it'll let you use the fundamental as if it was divided 0 to 20, 0 to 30, so you can have a little bit more precision without having another button for it, right? Okay, let's get to one of the things I think might be a little bit more confusing. This is a random slider, a random coefficient. And this is a range coefficient for that random range, stochastic range, if you will. So stochasticism means organized randomness to a degree, influenced randomness, skewed randomness. In this sense, very limited. It's going to say how big of a range and then likelihood for it to generate a value within that range. Now, notice right here, it does have a range, but no random value. And as I turn up that random value, it becomes more and more visible, brighter, more opaque, what have you. If I adjusted the range, it gets smaller. The opacity changes with the randomness, right? So let me turn this down. Let's just put one of them on random. All right, let's look at the fundamental. Let's turn everything down so we can hear it first. That off. Okay, so it's a stable frequency. Now I'm going to turn up the randomness just a little bit. So you'll see it's going to mostly generate this set value, but it'll also generate values within this range. What is that range exactly? It's not supposed to be that precise of an instrument. So now we'll hear a little bit of sputtering, a little bit of changing in that formant frequency. Ooh, it sounds squirmy. Right? Let's crank up that randomness. That's still pretty discernible. Let's get this one going as well. So you notice that when you have one formant that's constant, it still sounds like a pretty stable sound. But when they're both variable, it sounds just like juicy noise, right? And we're not putting any post-processing on this. Do this with some delay on it. Oh my God, it sounds great. Let's do some width to that now. So it's normally just one cycle of that pulsarette. That is a tiny percentage of the fundamental, especially if we take something like 40 and we'll say 800. That would be 1/20th the wavelength. So it would be 95% empty, right? By increasing the width, we are increasing the number of cycles of that pulsarette. Now, I'll tell you, though, it's always an integer cycle. It's always a complete cycle. So if it doesn't have enough to get to 2 complete cycles of the pulsarette, it just does the one. It waits until it gets full cycles, right? That had to do with enveloping, and I don't know, I just thought it was kind of a relevant limitation to put on it, so I did. But by increasing the width, that formant will last longer. That pulsarette will last longer. Formant, pulsarette, they're the same thing. The pulsarette is the formant frequency. Pulsarette is just the name for that whole event. It has its own envelope. That's why it has its own name. Okay, so I increased the width. What's this going to sound like? Let's get that going. Oh, wow. See, now the formants are way more produced, and the randomness is also more produced, or more prevalent, more noticeable. All right, let's go width up all the way. Okay, so now here's another thing, too. If the formant frequency is really high, that wave shape is really short. If I have 5,000 hertz with 100% width, that's going to be a lot of cycles at 5,000 hertz because it's a really, really short wave, right? Now, if that formant is at 100 hertz, that might only be 2 cycles because it's a really long wave, right? It's, in fact, right here, 50 hertz for the fundamental. Formant is at 100 hertz, Formant 2 rather. That would only at max have 2 cycles of 100 hertz. That doesn't make it sound very dominant. Let's hear it. So it's pretty good there. Let's actually make it a little bit smaller so that way it can't be, because when it's exactly 2, it's basically continuous then. So because it's only a couple cycles until there's a break, it's not as prevalent as if we cranked it up to like 8,000. It's kind of shrill and piercing. So the key to pulsar synthesis is the silence period. I have pictures and diagrams of this. It's actually in here. In fact, let's go ahead and look at the tutorial thing here. I put this in, so if you're curious, just take a look. It's up in this menu here, Pulsar Synthesis Overview. So this is the duty cycle while the pulse rate is running. This is the silent period. It's silent. And then the pulsar period is the duty cycle plus the silence period. But by adjusting things that we affect that silence period and the other parameters as well. So if the pulsarette is a lower frequency, the silence period will go down because that waveform is longer. If the width is higher, there's more cycles of the pulsarette, the silence period will go down. If the fundamental goes up, the pulsar period gets shorter, and if everything else stays the same, the silence period gets shorter. It also gets longer in a lot of situations, so if the fundamental goes down, that pulsar period gets longer, and with the formant frequencies constant, the silent period goes up. And this can be a really, talk to any bass player. They always say it's more about the notes you don't play than the notes you play. Well, let's take that to the next frickin' time scale, okay? Panning, I assume you understand this. Right, left, right. Okay, this also has stochastic parameters as well as a range. But I'll tell you, it's the bottom one. The longer ones are always the range. The randomness, 0% chance, 100% chance are the smaller ones. It's inverted for pan just to... because it looks better, right? So let's give it a little range. And what can be kind of fun is to have a pretty high likelihood, but within a small range, and then still control the pan. So it's like, and it kind of jumps around side to side on you. All right, let's try that. I'm going to turn down this width again. All right, pretty good. Let's go crazy. If you want it will sync to your tempo. I'm monitoring this right now, and oh my God, it's really delayed. So hopefully it sounds all right for you. All right, that is a little bit more, I'll admit, a little gimmicky right now. Same with the key things, although some of them sound pretty nice. The problem being with the grid mode is that it doesn't automatically lock to the grid. So if you don't cue it exactly right, it works more like a delay that's synchronized. It's the right length. It's exactly an eighth note at 120, whatever the tempo is, right? But if you don't cue it exactly on time, it's not going to lock to that grid. So it can be kind of tough sometimes. Take, for example, I have pentatonic major and pentatonic minor over here for E major and F minor. Let's hear that. Now this you really kind of got to add some randomness to. And then it works like a arpeggiator, really. It's like... So this is like one of my, oh, let me get my logo back up again. Okay, I'm going to load up here Appalachian Stochastic, which is a reference to Aaron Copland. Appalachian Spring, just because it's pentatonic. This one needs some reverb. All right, enough. I've been giving you dry signal all day. Let's get some reverb on this, huh? You know what we're gonna do too. Reflections every time. I'll go fitty. I actually more wanted the reverb than the delay though, so we'll turn down that delay output. And actually, maybe we should have almost no delay output and just have it. There we go. Yeah, I like that. And I like that. Okay. All right, let's talk about glide here. So this can be pretty useful, especially when you got reverb like this, to kind of like kind of rip through some random value generation. So let's just check it out. And I want to switch this up. Yeah, so that's pretty good. Let's put on a Valhalla here as well. Frequency echo, my fave. And it sounds kind of like knives in a wind chime or something. Now, the glide can be kind of cool, though, too, if you want to, like, set it and forget it. So you want to start a long gesture, and then it's in my, in diffraction, I'll try and link that video. It's on my other account, Ryan Devins and His Music. I performed with this, right? And sometimes what I would do is be like, oh, wait. Oh, shoot. I had the glide up really high. I would do something like get it going really high. And because the glide's so high, it's going to take like 10 seconds. And then I'd be like playing some shit. And then I come over. And then I come back playing on my Moog or whatever. And then I'd come over and I'd do this. So it can work out pretty well if you know where you want to land, right? Oh, and speaking of which, I did not use the mouse. I used the sliders, which is totally mappable. I mean, they're just parameters. They show up as parameters in your DAW, right? So if you have a DAW, you can map it and control it. And I perform with this live. I mean, it's electroacoustic, don't get me wrong. It's not really a big... Although some of these things, when they're key locked, I think I could do in a jazz concert. Yeah, so you could map it to a slider and deal with it that way, all right? So a quick overview here, okay?